What's up, AVS bros? Welcome to another AVS Tech Talk. This is where we, generally want to go over, platform updates or, more pieces or dive deeper into additional topics on videos that we've done. And I'm going to be your host today. My name is Matthew Webb. And today I've got one of my partners in crime over in Europe, which every time we're on the phone, Jeff, it's either dark here or dark there because I'm on the West Coast and you're all the way in Austria. So maybe, Jeff, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jeff Moore. I'm the lead for AVS on the VMware by Broadcom side, and I work closely with people like Matt in different regions on AVS efforts.
Yeah. So today's going to be a platform update tech talk, which is pretty exciting. This one kind of took me by surprise. And better late than never. I know we're recording in May, but this is for April. But Jeff, maybe you want to kick us off on what's new in AVS for April 2024.
Sure. I think the main topic for today is around the stretch clusters for AVS. So as you can see, based on the screenshot, the new available region is East US. Stretch clusters have been around for quite a while, so we have a number of large customers using it for high availability with large deployments up to 96 nodes. And it really provides the reason why people would do it is because if they're using some kind of highly available solution on-prem, maybe between two different data centers with a layer 2 connection in between and having like a stretched vCenter in between where it's one instance, they want to maintain that operational model as they go into the cloud. And AVS provides that option. So you can have a stretch cluster in the cloud as well and maintain that operational model between on-prem and the cloud itself.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because stretch clusters have been around for some time. I want to say 2 years, maybe even two
That's
plus
correct.
years. It started in EMEA and I think it GA'd in 2023. And so now in 2024, now we have it into East US. So, you definitely over there have had more customers adopted just because of the availability in the region. So that's pretty exciting.
100%.
Um, yeah, so maybe double clicking into what Jeff said because there's a lot of key points that are worth calling out. Let's first double click into how VSAN works because if you don't have that basic understanding, stretch clusters is going to be a little hard to understand. So when you have a VSAN cluster, what we're doing is essentially RAIN instead of RAID. So we do redundant array of independent nodes instead of redundant array of independent disks. And so essentially a node is a fault domain. So when you set that FTT setting or failures to tolerate, that's what we're saying. We can handle one fault domain failure and still have availability of the data. So if say node 2 died, in this depiction here, we still have availability of the data because we still have node 1 has a copy of that. And of course, if the VM that it owns that data is on node 2 and it dies, the node dies, HA kicks in, and HA only kicks in because the data is still available there. So that's sort of like the basics. We use fault domains and we spread copies of data across those fault domains to make high availability of your data. So when it comes to stretch clustering, we're actually not doing anything groundbreaking in this since we already have essentially software managing the availability of the data and spreading them across fault domains. We can nest fault domains. And so what's pretty cool about VSAN is, if you do this VSAN on-prem, you can do this in racks. So you can make fault domains within a rack instead of a node and have it spread out. So if you want to have like an entire rack failed and you're still up, you can do that. But specifically in stretch clustering, we're nesting fault domains. So now we've got a fault domain across sites, and we also have fault domains within sites. And so you're going to have what's referred to as a primary failures to tolerate and a secondary failures to tolerate. So PFTT and SFTT. And so the PFTT, you could be either 1 or 0. So for an example of a tier 0 type of application or virtual machine, I say this is going to be a PFTT of 1 because I want copies across the two sites. And then I may have maybe even FTT of 2 within site for even more copies and more availability. And I could also have maybe tier 3 applications or something that's a lower tier, doesn't need to have the quite same SLA. I could have a PFTT of 0 or no site resiliency. And then within that site, it's obviously protected because we want high availability of the data. So that's really, the key thing to take away from what VSAN's doing behind the scenes in stretch clustering is we're really nesting fault domains. One thing that I don't know if you ran into, Jeff, and maybe you can make comment on, I didn't necessarily see this in the documentation, but it's important to call out. There are DRS rules that go along with this. So, in your storage policy settings, it's pretty clear you have a primary site and a secondary site, and so you choose where the data is, like which data is the primary data, because you don't want to necessarily read data across the wire at this other availability zone. So DRS affinity rules, or aka placement policies within the Azure portal, which is essentially using DRS rules on the back end, you need to make sure that they align up. So if you set up a PFTT of one and the primary site is the preferred site, then your DRS rule for that VM should keep it on that site or preferred on that site too. Otherwise, you're going to split up your VM and your data. So I don't know, Jeff, is that something you came across in your experiences in EMEA or?
We have. So, and I think you've done another session on this. A lot of these things are done through the normal DRS service within the VMware stack. Although within AVS, all that control has been put through or actually built in the portal itself. And again, I think you've done a session on run commands. So if you go into the Azure portal where AVS is listed on the left-hand side, you'll see an option called run commands. And this is where you can build your affinity or anti-affinity rules, just as Matt mentioned, to say where you want that VMware placement, and in case of failure, how you want that placement to reside afterwards. So just as a note, if you're looking for that placement or storage policy, those are all placed in the run commands.
Very nice. Yeah, so we've mentioned a couple times already that this is more an availability, and one thing to call out is AVS already has a 99.9% SLA. That's documented well within Azure's SLA policies. Now, the blogs mentioned this will get you that extra 9, right? So for availability purposes, it gets, stretch cluster will get you to 99.99. I didn't necessarily see that in the SLA document, but the blogs do mention that, so it's worth calling out. So this is for those customers that want that availability. It's not necessarily DR. And I don't know, maybe Jeff, you could elaborate on that more.
Right. So this is something we talked about and we wanted to call out. So there is a difference, obviously, between a stretch cluster. Would be a single instance of vCenter across 2 different AZs, as an example, to provide that highly available solution for customers, let's say approaching 4 nines. And that's what's on the left. Although there is still a need for a strategy for disaster recovery, whether that instance on the right is another AVS region and or on-site. So you could be DRing from on-site into AVS, AVS into on-prem, or from AVS to AVS. And ironically, we have had customers who have a stretch cluster on-prem, so between 2 different data centers, a single vCenter instance above, going into AVS, same idea, 2 different AZs with a stretch cluster above. But in between the two, on-prem and AVS, they have a DR strategy. In this case, we could use the example of Site Recovery Manager for that DR solution based on their highly available requirements. So again, stretch cluster on-prem, stretch cluster in AVS, but a DR solution to provide that disaster recovery between on-prem and the cloud, or from cloud to cloud.
Yeah, definitely. So, kind of going back, a little bit of more opinion. You work with some very large enterprises in EMEA, so I'd love to get your take on how they approach this. I've worked with a lot of SLED customers within the United States. I work with smaller and medium-sized corporations, and I have some large, tech, providers as well. So I kind of have the gamut of that experience. And so sometimes this is the standard that you need, and certainly, enterprise, true enterprises should adopt this type of strategy. Build in as much availability as you can within the primary site, and stretch clustering and stretching across availability zones is one way to do that. But at the end of the day, sometimes I get asked from smaller customers, is this something I should do and forego a DR? And I typically lean back to no. I think you should lean into maybe you just have a regular cluster on your primary, and then you have a DR site, right? So kind of gets into that old adage of, especially for like disaster recovery, the closer you get to a recovery time objective of zero, costs start to hockey stick, right? So you have to
Right.
kind of balance that, your goals for your company and the SLAs you set and the expectations you set for your company. I don't know, any feedback there, Jeffrey? I think that sometimes that's one thing that goes through customers' minds.
I would agree. I think that's all has to be done with some type of approach to how what the requirements are versus cost. And the one thing I would say about a stretch cluster is that the one great advantage that I see is we have one vCenter instance. So from a consumption perspective, we're dealing with one vCenter UI versus two in a disaster recovery mode. The DR solution is very good, but I think it really depends on where you are from a requirements perspective. If you need it 4 nines, the stretch cluster provides that both on-prem and in the cloud. And if there is a disaster, it fails over to the other side almost seamlessly because you still have that single vCenter instance.
Yeah.
Although in other situations, DR is a perfectly good solution. Of course, the actual number of nines, whether it's 3 nines or 4 nines, would have to be measured. But I think it's still a fantastic, and actually we're showing here is even used when we're using stretch clusters. But I think it really depends on, again, what you mentioned, Matt. What is the measurement between the requirements, the technical requirements, and of course the measurable costs for that to be deployed?
Yeah. And you keep bringing up great points that remind me, um, within the UI, this looks like just a regular cluster. Like you wouldn't know it's actually a stretch cluster until you go into the VSAN settings and actually see that there is stretch clustering enabled. Or you look at your DRS rules to see that there's like a primary site and a secondary site. So that's a great point you call out. It is one vCenter instance and then one cluster object. If you just looked at it at surface in the inventory screen, you wouldn't really even know that it's actually a stretch cluster. And so that's one thing that throws people off when they look at it. We're really just using, again, this fault domain concept with DRS rules, and behind the scenes it's creating those nested fault domains for high availability. So
Fully agreed.
yeah, that can definitely throw someone for a loop when they log in. They're like, what's so special about this cluster? I don't see anything until I
No,
double
customers
click it.
like that approach.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good. It leverages our existing stack and doesn't add any additional complexity. So I don't know, great feature. I'm super excited about it. It was a little bit slower of a rollout, but nonetheless, I think that just goes to show, Microsoft's commitment to this product and updates. I don't know, any final thoughts, Jeff?
No, I just want to encourage people to look into this feature. We have a lot of large customers. Unfortunately, we can't get them publicly. Look, they've already deployed stretch clusters, so we know that large customers have bought into it. If you have questions, let us know, either on the Microsoft side or the VMware by Broadcom side, and we're happy to speak with you.
Yeah, and feel free to, drop a comment in. We monitor the comments. We'll be happy to reply to that. And we're both on LinkedIn. Certainly reach out to us. Appreciate everyone's time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.